Hello everyone, this is John Marks here again. This is going to be part 5 of my Whispers of the Old Gods reviews. This one will be for Paladin. Um, so let's hop right into it. This is John Marks here again. Sorry, I had to mute my stream. I had it on there. Alright, so let's go in. Ragnaros the Light Lord is the legendary. At the end of your turn, restore 8 health to a damaged friendly character. This card seems very good to me. The thing is, in general, when you pay 8 mana for a card, I've said this over and over in my previous reviews, when you pay 8 mana for a card, it has to be really good. You have to get a lot of things going on, right? And this card seems like it does that, kind of. It's a defensive Ragnaros, which is actually probably better in a lot of ways, because if you're playing more of sort of a control deck, having a defensive big game or big card is maybe better than an offensive big game card. You can set this up in certain ways, like hypothetically if you have one big minion in play and you're already at full health, you can like trade and then play this and get a nice heal on it, and then they still have to deal with this. If you're a bit behind, you can play this as your only minion and get an 8 health heal, and then it's effectively almost like a 16 health heal, because if they can't kill you because of the 8 heal, they might still be able to kill you anyways, even with the 8 heal. I mean, people have played a heal bot and lost, and this is basically the same amount of health as a heal bot. But most times when you played a heal bot, you'd survive a turn, right? So, like, if you look at this as sort of similar to a heal bot, it's 3 more mana, but you're getting an 8/8, and it has to be killed, because if they don't, you're just going to get 8 more health, right? So, I think it's a good card. I think it's the real problem with this card is it's like a control card, and I'm not so sure that Paladin control decks will be good enough that you'll be able to pull that off. I do think the metagame, as I've discussed in my previous videos, is going to be very fast, and so I just don't know if this card will be able to keep up. If there is a control deck, Paladin is one of the choices to be able to potentially pull it off. I mean, Warrior and Priest would be the others, but obviously this and then the other Forbidden Healing card there's a lot of healing. It's possible Paladin can pull off a control deck, but I'm not sure. But overall, this is a good card, and if Paladin controls a thing, this will be a good or a great card even. And so I do like the card, and I think it's a very strong legendary. It also, I think, is like an alternative kind of to Lay on Hands, where one of my big problems with Lay on Hands is the tempo loss you suffer when you play a Lay on Hands. You play this 8 mana card to draw 3 more cards and get a heal. Is an 8/8 better than 3 cards? Well, yeah, probably, because it's probably going to get a few cards anyway, and it's more proactive, and you still can play this offensively somewhat. Like I said, you can do minion trading and then get chances to heal your minions back up as well as healing yourself too. So yeah, I think it's a good card, and it will definitely be tried out, and I'm not sure it will fit in every deck, and it's probably not great in the mid-range decks. Tyrion's just better, and it's already 8 mana, and it's obviously probably not going to be any aggro decks, but if Control Paladin's a thing, I think it will be good. Alright, so the second card we have is the Balfin Inquisitor, which is really good in my opinion, actually. So I think people are really underestimating how good this card is. Okay, well, I obviously have opinions. I feel like the metagame's going to be very fast. If the metagame's very fast, a 1/3 is a good answer to fast minions. Most early minions are 1/1s or 2/1s, like a Argent Squire or Abusive Sergeant, or whatever. There's going to be like minions that a 1/3 lines up very well against, and the fact that it is a Murloc is a big deal. I mean, having played Murloc decks in the past, the real problem is the 1 mana Murlocs would always die. You play the 1 mana 2/1 Murloc, and it's just guaranteed to be dead whenever you play your War Leader. But with this, it's a 1/3. I mean, the best strategy against Murloc decks is to try to make sure they don't have Murlocs in play to get War Leader or Cold Light Seer value. Like, you don't want them to have Murlocs in play on turn 3, because if they do, they're going to get, maybe they're going to give them more health, or maybe they're going to give them, +2/+1 and get good trades. So in general, the best way to play against a Murloc deck is make sure they don't have a lot of Murlocs, right? Well, this guy's kind of a little hard to deal with, Like, granted, you can still Fiery War Axe him or something like that, but, like, in a lot of sort of more minion combat matchups, like if you're playing versus Zoo deck or something, they may have to use Abusive Sergeant or something to kill this. It's kind of like a Voidwalker in that way, um, if you've played a lot of Zoo or Zoo on Zoo mirrors, like, Voidwalker's really good, right? And just not necessarily just because it's taunt, but just because a 1/3 lines up good against a lot of things. Um, so I think this card is going to be good just because it's a 1/3 and a Murloc, um, which also synergizes very well with other Murlocs. Like, so for example, the card that's a 1-mana 1/2 Murloc that gets +1 for other Murlocs coming into play, the card's pretty good. I mean, it has 2 health, and if you go first and play that, you're more likely to be able to have this and maybe even another one, or another, a Sir Finley or something, to really snowball a big minion early or something like that. Or maybe on turn 3, for example, you can play this and then use the hero power, which is another Murloc, right? So it's another thing. Making the hero power Murlocs is great, because it also synergizes extremely well with the whole point of Murlocs, which is getting a lot of Murlocs on play and then playing these big buffs to them, right? So if you play the Vilefin Inquisitor, every time you make a Murloc hero power token, it's something that must be dealt with, because eventually you're going to draw a War Leader, and all those 1/1 tokens are going to turn into 3/2. So it's like almost like the equivalent of a Quartermaster, like if you keep, I mean, it won't stay forever. All they need to do is kill the War Leader or whatever. But another example is the Cold Light Seer. You can make all your hero power guys will be 1/3s all of a sudden, So excuse me. I think there's. I think this is a great card, actually. Great card. And I think there's 2 ways this can be used. I think you can play a aggro Paladin deck with Divine Favor, like an aggro Murloc Paladin deck with this and Divine Favor, and this will be pretty good. Or I think you can play like a sort of mid-range Paladin deck that just has maybe these two Murloc Knights and 2 War Leaders. And, like if you get this in play and you start making guys and you keep a couple guys on board, War Leader's going to be insane, right? Like, so they have to really prioritize killing your guys, like the same way they had to really prioritize killing guys when Quartermaster. Granted, there's no muster equivalent to get a bunch of them fast, but it's still just, it adds a lot more threat to your hero power, and for just 1 card, and it's a good zombie chow replacement in a mid-range Paladin. Not quite as strong as a zombie chow because it's a 1/3 instead of a 2/3, but a lot of times a 1/3 would be almost as good versus a lot of the earlier game 1-drops, and probably a little worse against the 2-drops, but it's still at least okay, and it gets buffed by War Leader, So, and then as far as the aggro decks, like, you want a lot of 1-drops with the Divine Favor, and this is a great one. It also gives you the ability to sort of swap around hero powers. Like, so for example, you can play Sir Finley early to get something and then use it until later you want to get this again, or vice versa. You can swap around a little bit. It gives you a little bit more flexibility. Like, sometimes with Sir Finley, maybe you just don't get the best option. Well, now you can just take it back to this, right? So I think it's definitely a lot better. Like, I mean, I know some people like this card, but I think it's better than people realize, and I think it's going to be one of the cards that's almost always played in the set as both an early game anti-aggro tool and just an actual aggro tool itself in more Murloc decks. So I like the card a lot. Next card, Forbidden Healing. Spend all your mana, heal for double the mana you spent. I think this card's pretty cool. It's kind of like a way better Tree of Life. I mean, Tree of Life is a card that didn't really see any play, but occasionally you'd see the old 20-point Tree of Life win a game. So this can actually be, 16 to 20 health healing in the late game, but it also allows you to use early game healing for board control, so it's very flexible. And if you look at any one individual, like 1 mana heal 2's not great. I mean, obviously there's Flash Heal does 5 for 1 mana, right? I mean, that's a pre-spell, but you get my point. Like 1 mana healing 2 isn't the greatest thing in the world, but in a lot of situations it can be really good. Like, let's say hypothetically you have a 3/4 in play, and you are on turn 5 or something. Uh, and they have a 2/2. Well, you can attack their 2/2, play your own minion, and then heal your guy back up, and then like, I mean, you have a much stronger board. I mean, I'm not sure that's a great play, but you can do it, and it's an option. So, and it's at least okay. I think it's more likely going to be used to heal yourself. It's more likely going to be like sort of a tech card if like Freeze Mage is popular or something. Like if somebody Alex Strazes you, and then you can just be back to 20 or back to 30. Like it's pretty strong. So I think it's a good flexible card. I think possible even a tech card in aggro decks. Like let's say for example I'm going to play like a aggro Paladin deck, like an aggro Murloc Paladin deck. If the metagame's super aggressive, like I can play this card and use it as just sort of like the equivalent of like a Lotheb or something, like in the late game to just basically guarantee a win. Like if I'm a bit more mid-rangey, a little bit stronger, like and they're a little faster, like it can allow me to just turn the game with just one card. So could happen, probably not as likely, but I do think it's a pretty good card. Alright, so the next card, Steward of Darkshire. Whenever you summon a 1 health minion, give it Divine Shield. I think this card is just okay. I don't think it will see play because the problem with this card is not... It's a 3-mana 3/3, which is just fine, and it has an ability, and the ability is pretty good. But like the ability... For the ability really to be pulled off, you need to play minions after you play this because it's so easy to kill, right? It's not like this thing's going to sit around on the board forever. So this is the kind of thing where it's not a turn 3 play, it's like a turn 8 play or a turn 6 play where, you play this and then you play some guys, right? And they all have Divine Shield. And then this dies and then you have all those Divine Shields, right? It's probably too slow. I mean, this is sort of the same philosophy of like, if you're doing something for 6 mana, it has to be super powerful. So like a card I would compare this to is like Grim Patron, right? So Grim Patron's a card, it's only a 3/3 5-mana card, but the whole point is setting up a bunch of big combos with it. But after those big combos, you have a bunch of 3/3s on the board, and those are very threatening as like a group of 4 to 6 3/3s, right? Or 3 2s and 3 1s. This, on the other hand, is like a card where you need to set up a bunch of big combos, and then after you do it, you have a bunch of probably 1/1 Divine Shields. Like, so what? Like it just doesn't really matter. So my guess is this actually won't really see much play. Rallying Blade. Give +1/+1 minions to your minions with Divine Shield, and it's 3/2 weapon. So this card is kind of hard to place because this card's pretty good. It's not as good as Coghammer. For a 3-mana weapon, but like I would compare it more to other class weapons. Like I would compare it to the Shaman weapon, the one that gives a mech, something like that, right? If you have Divine Shield, like if you have more than one Divine Shield minion when you play this, it's amazing. If you have a Divine Shield minion when you play this, it's pretty good. Like a 3-mana 3/2 weapon's acceptable, right? Like we've seen Power Mace, we've seen the Eaglehorn Bow be good cards, even just on their own merit. It's like Fiery War Axe is obviously one of the best cards in the game for a 2-mana 3/2 weapon. So if you get an extra bonus from it and get to trade, I mean, the thing is, if you have Divine Shields, the best thing to do with Divine Shields is get a nice trade, right? And so this can give you just that little edge to get an even better trade. And so if you have a Divine Shield minion in play, I think it's going to be pretty decent. But how do you have a Divine Shield minion in play? I mean, because the main thing you want with weapons is a turn 3 play. Like the whole point of a weapon is to get a tempo advantage early game where you can use your health to effectively get the board advantage when you wouldn't otherwise be able to get it because you get 2 swings with it. So you get to kill 2 things and then go from having a board disadvantage to a board advantage, right? So how am I going to use this weapon? How am I going to come into turn 3 while having Divine Shields in play currently, right? Now, the next card lets you get a Divine Shield. I mean, you can have an Argent Squire in play. Minibot's rotated out. Annoyatron's rotated out. I mean, if Minibot and Annoyatron were still in, maybe this is a bit better. But then once again, it's still sort of hard to compete with Coghammer because Coghammer's better than giving the minion +1/+1 is giving it another Divine Shield after it breaks the Divine Shield, right? So, like if I had a Minibot in play and they have a 2/2 in play or a 3/2 in play, which would I rather have, Rallying Blade or the Coghammer? Well, Coghammer. So Coghammer is just flatly better than this. So the only way this is ever seeing play is in Standard, right? And in Standard, I don't see many ways to get the Divine Shield. So even though I think it's an interesting card, and it may actually be a card to just think about later, like this is one of those cards where like all of a sudden like some new card comes out and makes it good later, right? Like if this card had already been in play and Coghammer wasn't created, but Minibot was, then all of a sudden this may have been a bit better, you know? Then you could have the old Divine Shield Minibot and Annoyatron deck where, like, you know, sometimes you'll occasionally get this and snowball game, but yeah, so it's probably not going to see any play. Selfless Hero, 2/1, give a random friendly minion Divine Shield. This is pretty good, I think. Just compare it to something like Leper Gnome or something. You play it early, and ideally the whole point of Leper Gnome or a random 2/1 is that it gets a nice trade. It's a 1-mana that gets a pretty nice trade and then does something. So for example, you play a Leper Gnome, then an old Leper Gnome, they couldn't play a Knife Juggler, or they couldn't, you know, they couldn't play a 3/2 or whatever because now you just have this 2/1 and you get this nice trade, right? Or like, you know, you Abusive Sergeant it and get a nice trade, same sort of thing. So like, for example, this thing with Abusive Sergeant, it's not bad, right? Like you can play this on turn 1, they play a minion, you play another minion, you attack their minion, you get a Divine Shield. If they play a minion that's too big, you could even Abusive it, attack it, get an Abusive Divine Shield. And we all know like a random minion that has a Divine Shield that's kind of small is pretty good. So this is just giving it to you a turn later. So I think this is a good card. I think the real hard thing with this card is going to be lining it up in a way such that you're going to have something you want to trade in on turn 2 and that you have something you want to Divine Shield. That's going to be the hard way to line it up. Because if you just play it and they kill it, it's useless, right? You need another minion on the board for it to be good. And the best way I see that happening is you play this turn 1, they can't kill it, then you play another minion and ram your minion into it and give yours Divine Shield. That seems the best way to use it. But I think it's a good card. I would like to try it. Next card, Stand Against Darkness, summon 5/1/1 Silverhand Recruits. I don't think this is good. It's way worse than Muster. I mean, Muster's 2 mana less, and if you think about a 1/1 as being sort of like 1 damage, Muster, when it comes into play, is like 3 1/1s and 1 damage, because you can kill one of their 1/1s or whatever, right? So Muster's almost like the same as 4 1/1s immediately with even more 1/1s later, whereas this is just 5 1/1s immediately. So I can't see this being even close to as good as Muster, and it's not a replacement for Muster because it's too slow, so I don't think it will see any play at all. Discover a minion, give it +1/+1. I think this is probably too slow. I mean, we've even seen cards that are much better than this one be too slow, which is like something like Dark Cultist and Priest, or Museum Curator and Priest. I mean, it's a 1/2 body, so you get an extra 1/2 body, and you get a Death Rattle minion, which is probably better than a normal minion. In general, Death Rattle minions are pretty good minions, whereas normal minions, a lot of them won't be, so you're really gambling. Now, in this case, it gives it +1/+1, but since most minions are bad, most of the time you're going to get 3 bad cards that are slightly better than they used to be, and you don't get the 1/2 body, and even that 1/2 doesn't see a lot of play, you know. So like I can't see this one seeing play really. It just doesn't really fit in any of the deck types either, right? Like if you're playing Paladin, you either want to be playing like a board centric, board control, like take the board Paladin, which this doesn't do, or you're playing control Paladin. Why would you want this? You just want a, you know, a more specific card that you put in your deck. So I don't like this card. Divine Strength, give a minion +1/+2. This is another card I think is underrated. This is a kind of card, because it's so cheap. I mean, the only type of deck you probably would play this card in is a Divine Favor deck, but this could be very good in a Divine Favor deck. It does give you some really good trades, and the other thing is combo specifically with the Valfin Inquisitor because a 2 mana, what is what would it be, a 2 mana 2/5? Pretty great early game, right? Alternately, you basically get like a 2 mana 2/3 for like the, with the Death Rattle Divine Shield stuff. So it's not a great card just in terms of value, but in terms of tempo, it's okay. It allows a good trade. It makes a minion a little better. It also synergizes with Divine Favor, which Divine Favor didn't get nerfed, and people are still going to play Divine Favor. So if they just, and it also synergizes in something like the Ginny of Zephyrs type deck. So if you play a Ginny of Zephyrs deck, you generally want to have like a lot of ways to buff things and a lot of ways to receive buffs. For example, you may want to play the Ginny of Zephyrs, and you may want to play the Lightbane Sisters, and you may want to play like the dragon that gets a buff for buffs, or you want to play a lot of buffs and a lot of buff receivers, right? And this buff, is it better than Blessing of Might? Well, sometimes. I mean, maybe. I mean, Blessing of Might's a lot more damage, but if you're playing a more board control deck, this might just be better. Like, health's better than attack if you're playing for board control. So I think this is underrated. I think it just depends on the kind of deck you're playing. But that being said, like, I'm not going to just throw this in every deck or anything. It's definitely a bit niche, but I think it could see some play. I think it's a little bit underrated by other people. So quick summary of the cards, and then we'll build a deck. I think Ragnaros is really good. I think the Valfin Inquisitor's very good and underrated. I think the Forbidden Healing's good. Steward of Darkshire probably bad. Relling Blade bad. Selfless Hero seems like a good card. It may be hard to find a deck to fit it in, but some kind of aggro paladin. Stand Against Darkness is bad. Light in the Darkness, not great. And Divine Strength, I think, is okay, or maybe even mediocre, and it will potentially see some play in some Divine Favor decks. Alright, so I'm going to go and build a Murloc Paladin deck because I think that will be the most fun. So something that I think, I saw a Strifeco video talking about how he thinks tribes will be better, Murlocs and Pirates, than they used to be because of the fact that Mini brought Muster, Creeper, and all that stuff's going to be gone, and I think he's right. Like, I played Hearthstone before those cards existed, and Murloc was actually pretty good. Now, in general, Murloc was only really good in Warlock because Warlock was the only one that could support drawing enough cards for it to be good. The thing is that, like, I believe Paladin can support it with a Divine Favor now. We'll have to see. Alright, so we're going to just build a Murloc deck, which probably is only going to have the Valfin from this set, but so my plan is to play a very cheap deck, well, not very cheap, reasonably cheap deck, probably topping out at maybe 4 mana, and also, so in aggro paladin decks before, people would play like maybe a Loatheb and a Boom as their late game, but I feel like playing 2 Murloc Knights as your late game is kind of better than that. So you're going to play a lot of this similar stuff you'd play in an aggro paladin, like the Blessing of Kings, Keeper of Ultimate, Consecrate, True Silver Champion, like the sort of like good board game cards, and then just a bunch of early game good board minions, right? So abusive, and it's possible we should try the new Paladin 1-drop, but I think maybe there's too many good Murlocs, because see, like, we already have 7 1-drops is probably roughly what I want. Inquisitor, it's possible Inquisitor, it's possible the new Paladin 1-drop's better than the Inquisitor, or maybe one of each. For now, we're going to stick with the all Murlocs theme. Oh, one of my favorite cards from the new set will actually fit extremely well into this deck, which is the Bluefin Tidehunter. So most aggro paladin decks run the deckhand because they had Muster and Coghammer. Well, now we only have one weapon, but Bluegill's a nice replacement, and it's a Murloc. So that is a good replacement for the deckhand. And you know what? I think I'm just going to go full-blown Murloc for this deck. And caveat is like, obviously these decks are just decks that I think will be pretty good starting points for the new set. And I'm trying to find one more Murloc here. I guess if I was smart, I would just search for Murloc. Okay. So then we want to play the Seers and the War Leaders. Okay, so what do we have here? Probably we need another 2-drop. What do we want for a 2-drop? You know what? It's possible we actually don't want to play the Valfen Inquisitor in the aggro deck because we really don't want to lose whatever we get from Finley, and we also it's only one attack. Like, we really want to have the extra attack, so I'm going to try this new card instead. So we're running Sir Finley still, though, because he's amazing. The Murloc Tidecaller is really good. Maybe we could run one Tidecaller and one of the 1/3s, but for now we'll stick with this. I think the Selfless Hero will be good in this style of deck. And I need another 2-drop. Let's see if there's anything in Whispers of the Old Gods I want for 2. Not really. Could play an Argent Lance, but I don't really have any big cards, so that doesn't seem great. Could just play like a Flame Juggler or something, just like a random 2-mana decent minion. I also don't, like most aggro Paladin decks would run an Owl. I don't have the equivalent of an Owl. Could run an Equality or an Owl, I guess. 3-mana Owl seems kind of bad. I could run a Spellbreaker instead of like one later game card, maybe. Direwolf Alpha could be decent. Because I'm going to have all these like sort of token generators and run one of those. So something like this. This is a very similar deck to sort of like the current aggro decks with the Murlocs instead of like the Musters and Minibots. And obviously we have the Divine Favor, and we have a lot of fast early game. And then if we keep a board, we have tons of ways to buff our board with Keeper of Oldham and Blessing of Kings. This may be overboard because with Muster and Creeper, it was way more likely these things would be good. So maybe we want to cut Blessing of Kings and have some other sort of more valuable card. Could even be some late game card like an Anyfin. Or like a Tyrion. Could be even more 1-drops. I could run the 2 1/3s and have an even faster deck. But that's super risky if you don't draw the Divine Favor. I feel like it's better to have sort of a hedge of, if I don't draw Divine Favor, I have some other way of getting a lot of value. Could also be something along the lines of an Aldor Peacekeeper. anything in here that looks cool? Don't think so. Maybe just something like play one Tyrion and maybe I'll just play one of those new Murlocs. Maybe I do want to play two of those new Murlocs. It is a Murloc deck. Or I could play a Divine Strength to try it out. Yeah, maybe I'd... I guess the whole point of this is new cards. Let's just play a bunch of new cards and try the Divine Strength. Yeah, so something like that. I think this deck will actually be really good. I don't think people are underestimating how good an aggro Paladin can still be, and especially with the Murloc synergy. I mean, the way I built it this way, I didn't end up using the 1-3, but I think you could use the 1-3 instead of the Divine Strength, for example. Maybe it'd actually just be better, and maybe we could play this with a little more late game. We could even play this with Anyfin, so that, like, you know, we're gonna basically play a bunch of early game Murlocs and go for the throat, and then like if we can't quite get there, we can still play a Anyfin in the late game, so that could work too. But this is just one way of building it. All right, well, that'll be the end of my part 5 video on Whispers of the Old Gods, and I think I'm gonna take a break for now. Next up, I'll be doing Priest, and thanks for watching.